We are now live.
All right. Well, welcome again, take two, to the Preparation and Entry Subcommittee meeting for June 10, 2022. Thank you all for being here. Our agenda for today, I think, is on the next slide. If you could flip it for us, Kim. And the first thing we need to do is the approval of the agenda. Dr. Evans sent out the agenda and minutes from the May 3rd meeting, as well as a plethora of other documents that we have for you to look at. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda and minutes from May 3rd? We'll do it as a group.
I move. Bill Kirk moves.
Thanks, Bill. Can you get a second?
Second, this is Christina.
Thanks, Christina. Any discussion or questions? Okay. All those in favor, if you say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, our agenda and minutes are approved. As we've done in some other meetings, or most of our other meetings, today we'll work in breakout sessions today, and Van will give you instructions for that in just a little bit as we get down to our last few meetings here before we put forward a proposal. You'll go to the next page, Kim. Again, our norms are here. I think everybody knows these by now, and this group has certainly been wonderful in working together and keeping the focus on excellence in our teaching profession and on the students that will be served by teachers. So I appreciate that as we continue this work. You can go ahead. And again, our guiding principles. Does your idea have impact on students, and is it measurable in an authentic setting? And again, I think everything that we've been doing up to this time has lived up to that particular mission. Okay. I think we shared this at the last meeting as well, but this is kind of our timeline here. We have this meeting, and then we'll have one in July, and then we're going to present our part of the proposal to PEPSC in August, and it goes up for approval in September, and then on to the state board in October, and approval either in November or December, and then eventually would have to go through the legislature to see if the funding would follow it. So the timeline's getting closer at this point, which is kind of exciting that we could see some light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, Kim. And again, our goals, the goal of the subcommittee meetings to make changes as determined to the current draft of the model, which we started at our last meeting and will continue today. Focus on our priorities for preparation and entry. And a quorum is not needed to finalize any changes made by the subcommittee. This will be the draft that we present to PEPSC for consideration and discussion and finally approval. Van, I'll hand it off to you here.
Thank you, Hank, and good morning, everybody. 2 slides just to sort of remind people of the framing of the work. One is this one that shows the responsibilities and the priorities of each one of the subcommittees. I probably should note that the subcommittee chair, a few meetings back, different subcommittees determined that it was probably important for the subcommittee co-chairs to start interacting with each other more than we had done in the earlier phases. So we've started to have more conversations across the subcommittees to try to make sure where we're moving ideas across. We discuss it in prep and entry, but it needs to be a discussion that happens in compensation, that those pieces of this are moving back and forth between the subcommittees. And then the next slide, Kim, if you will, the interface between the subcommittees. There you go. Which I always think makes this word feel like we're panda bears, but this shows the intersection of the different aspects of our committee relative to the other committees. And so Kim, if you would go to the next slide. We have the other direction. There you go. So we are receiving feedback from different groups, and CACTI we know has submitted feedback to us in the past, and we had a recent conversation in CACTI had a recent forum. We're also receiving information and feedback from other groups, in particular teacher focus group interviews, teacher organizations, where information is now starting to come into PEPSC, and some of that could be in the form of something that is more like a report. Some of it could be individuals submitting feedback and information. We do, as a matter of practice, try to channel that through Patrick Miller, who then coordinates with DPI on making sure we make that information available. In a recent set of focus groups that Julie Pittman and was it Maureen Stover, Kim? Yes.
Yes, that's right.
What you're seeing on the screen now is part of the feedback that was shared with the co-chairs of the subcommittees and DPI and Patrick Miller last week. And this is specific to our subcommittee. You can see there the call to action that came from the distillation of the focus groups: address how schools of education and alternative agencies support teachers in traditional and alternative pathways, build PD for all teachers, support growth for teachers throughout the career, and align to state and federal goals. And then questions that came from that process, you see down in the bottom part of the slide. I won't go over each one of the questions. And you now have this information. If you've not had a chance to look at this, I'll give us a second to read through it. And I'll add a particular point from my vantage point with this. These are questions that could be answered by the subcommittee and individuals on the subcommittee. People could provide feedback. I also think these are questions to the process, not just to the individuals and to this subcommittee specifically. So as this process continues to play out, these kinds of questions and feedback are going to be critical. So if you will go to the next slide, Kim. So today we're going to break out into 4 breakout sessions, breakout groups: the apprentice teacher license level, license 1, license 2, and license 3. So we'll be in 4 groups. It looks like we've got about 18 or 20 folks on the call. So hopefully we can continue to have robust conversations in the breakout groups. Kim, if you'll go to the next slide. Each one in the breakout session that we're about to do, we're going to be in there for about 55 minutes. Each group is going to focus on the role of the EPP and the PSU for the specific license level for that breakout group. The slide deck with all 4 of the license levels is included in the Google folder that you've been sent. As our usual practice, we'll ask each group to have a facilitator and a note taker to share out when we come back into the big group, and then there is an assignment sheet, Word document that was provided to each group. I want to refer to an additional document. Kim, I can't remember if you answered the question, could we put the PowerPoint that was used in the state board presentation in the chat?
So what I did is I separated out those slides, and for whatever your group number is, you're assigned to certain license levels. And so I have those slides available for you to directly edit. Okay. And you can highlight those according to, you can bold what you change or make it a different colored text. But then there's also a Word doc or a Google doc that you can put notes on separately if you can't fit everything on those slides.
Thank you, Kim. So what you're going to see in that document, to refresh your memory, each one of the license levels in that framing that was provided to PEPSC a few months ago and then to the State Board of Education as an update on the process breaks out into 4 parts of the structure. One is the salary component for the license level, the requirements of the license level, the support systems that need to be in place for the license level, and then any other documents that would pertain to that particular license level. So what you're going to have is that actual document. And whether you use strike through and underline or you use different colors, as Kim suggested, and using the Word document, we're using that as the framing of how we write the actual recommendations that will go before PEPSC, and then ultimately, assuming what PEPSC does, goes before the state board. I just want to make 2 or 3 comments about the process we're about to do before we go into the meeting. Number one, this is our opportunity as a subcommittee to literally write what goes into the presentation. So this is our work to do, to put the language in that becomes the language after we've had a chance to flesh it out and refine it, that ultimately would go to PEPSC. So number one, that's the work we're doing. Number 2, we are the authors. This group of people on this subcommittee are the authors of this language. And so I think it is really essential that while we want to continue unpacking the issues we're dealing with, that we focus on getting the proactive recommendation language down into the templates and the Word document. So we are actually reframing and editing where necessary the language and the information that's in that you'll see when you get in the breakout groups. But we are the authors of this, and we are right. The phrases I've seen in several focus groups and conversations is the model. And the model has been talked about in an abstract form. We are writing the model. That is what we are doing in this work. So this is our opportunity to author what this will be when we get to the recommendations. So that proactive, declarative, recommendation-oriented language, using that structure as a way to help frame the discussions we're about to have. So you'll see that when you get out into the breakout groups. Hank, is there anything we need to add before we get in the breakout groups?
No, I think we're ready to roll.
Okay. Thanks, Kim.
Hey, Tom.
Hello.
Hey, everybody's in breakout sessions for like another 40 minutes, 45 minutes, something like that. Would
All
you
right.
join one, or are you?
No, I just got done with PT. I got to shower real quick, and then so I'll have it on listening, but I won't be commenting.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Thanks.
Sure. Hey, Randy. I can't hear you. You're still muted.
Thank you. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
I have to hop on another call. Do you want me, and I told my group that, do you want me to just take my video off and mute myself and stay here, or do you want me to shut down and then log back in? I'll be about 20 minutes.
I mean, by then, breakout sessions should be over.
Mhm.
So if you want to just stay like this and then.
Okay, so if you want to let people know, so if anyone's trying to get a hold of me, and say, hey, Randy, why aren't you responding? If you can just let them know.
I'll type it in the chat. I'll let them know.
Awesome. All right, thanks. I'll see you soon.
No problem.
Hank and Kim, are we all back?
Yes.
Okay. We have about 45 minutes, I think. If we can just go one at a time, and we'll just go right through the sequence apprentice up to license 3. If we could take a few minutes for each group to report out and share your comments, and then we'll try to reserve some time to have a cross-group conversation. So the apprentice group.
All right, that's me, Van. I'm going to share my screen just so you guys can see our notes. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right. Can you see it? I'm not good with this.
I can see the slide.
Perfect. That's what I want you to see. Okay. So we were the apprentice group. We had 2 EPPs and 2 LEA people. We changed the salary, feeling like if you're an apprentice teacher, you should be making at least $35,000 a year. We also feel as if these candidates would have to qualify for the TA to teacher funding during student teaching, so that they can continue getting paid during that student teaching semester, because they will be earning a BA degree from the EPP and will have to do the student teaching semester. The LEAs felt confident about the initial teacher success program, so we didn't have any real changes to that. Here, should the apprenticeship be registered as a formally federal recognized apprenticeship? We all know what federal funds mean is a lot of reporting and a lot of paperwork, and we're not really sure if this would be feasible at this time for the LEAs to take on this level of accountability. The apprentice license, if you don't make it in 3 years, you can go back to being a TA. And then once again, we have that they will qualify for the apprentice salary for the 16-week student teaching or internship program. So we felt like we got the easy one, and we didn't have too many changes to make to that one. So any questions?
Can you pull that slide back?
Oh, you want to see it again? I'm sorry. I was trying to go fast. So
That's all right. I appreciate the the speed. So did you discuss in the group that if you change the salary in apprentice, we likely would it would
ripple effect? Yes.
Yeah, it's a ripple effect. Yeah. Okay.
So this is Tom, if I may.
You may.
If this is a recommendation, that particular piece on the salary needs to go as a recommendation to the Budget and Compensation Committee.
That's fine. We were just told to make the changes.
Sure. That was more for Kim. I'm sorry. I wanted to make sure that
we know we're in charge.
Yeah.
Any questions for the apprentice group? And license 1?
Okay, so Hank and I'm Tiffany, by the way. I am working with Julie Pittman this summer. I am a graduate intern from Vanderbilt. So we also thought about salary to begin our work. So just thinking about the average salary for college graduates, if we're asking someone to have a bachelor's degree, we thought $40,000 should be the starting pay. And then we also changed the language just a bit to say a baccalaureate degree or higher for specific CTE licensure areas or industry certification and experience. But then we also had a question for the group. So if we want to quantify like how much experience or what type of certification we thought was appropriate to earn this license, was it 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5, like how much time? We didn't settle on that. So then moving on to our second bullet. So 18 hours of relevant content coursework. We added coursework in there. and or EPP as established or determined by the EPP or employers as established by MOU. And then our third bullet must be affiliated with an EPP and employer that establishes a specific advancement and development plan for progression through the licensure pathway. So we just cleaned that up a little bit to make it like really clear about what the relationship would be between the EPP and the employer when they're like deciding with this license where people will go and what they'll do. All right, and then for our support, we didn't change anything to the first bullet, but we did take out the second bullet completely and kind of cleaned up the language a bit. So in that third bullet, we said the license for advanced teacher, the classroom excellence teacher serves as a co-teacher of record and provides mentoring and pedagogical support, structures weekly observation and or co-teaching opportunities for licensed one teacher for a minimum of one class period or 1 hour. We want to put that flexibility in there. Since we mentioned the specific like advancement and development plan and mentorship above in the requirements, we just took that piece out of the fourth bullet. And then we added in support provided by the EPP as defined by the MOU to include a minimum university supervision and evaluation of a licensed one teacher. And then that's all that we changed here. But we did have a couple questions, actually a lot of them. Let me pull this up so you can see it. So I already brought up the one about industry experience. We talked about the proposal. So we wanted to clarify, when we're talking about supervision of the candidate, would they be supervised by the teacher that they're paired with and the adult leader in the classroom or in the school or district or however it's structured? So that was a question that we had. And then, is it sufficient to say in the guidelines that the PEPs will provide the support they agree upon in the MOU to just kind of like leave that language there and to continue what we're doing already? Another question, could students use their advancement account towards their EPP education or professional development? Could there be some flexibility? And then could we collect license levels and forego license 2? We thought about, since if a person is going through the residency process, that's typically from a year to a year and a half. So if you collapse license 2, that might create some more funds for the prior license levels, and then also give that person more time to just go directly into a license 3 after they do finish those requirements. So a lot there, but that's what came up.
Thanks, Tiffany. The one other thing about the professional development accounts, one thing that came to us was, is $2,500 enough at this level? Could it be more at this level as an incentive to help defray some costs of tuition or other professional development to get them in the door with a baccalaureate degree? But otherwise, that was it. Thanks, Tiff.
Mm-hmm.
Hank, do you want to edit? Are you suggesting, and I think we probably should, literally editing that into the document?
Which part?
That last bullet, the professional development account, when you said that might be an insufficient amount.
Right.
If you want to make a note of that here just to capture it.
Sure.
Was it down in the other notes? I can't remember.
I can put it down there. I'm not sure if I typed it earlier.
Okay.
Okay.
License 2?
I think Dr. Aaron Horn had a comment to make after that last.
All right. Go ahead, Aaron.
Well, I have a question because I've seen this on this one as well as ours. And so we're saying that they are observed, and like, for example, I like the idea of the co-teacher of record and things that the licensed 1 group had put in, but they're doing it with a licensed 4 teacher. But I thought that's why we had the advanced teacher roles, because those are the ones that have demonstrated classroom excellence and adult leadership. And so we're saying that we're going to have them co-teaching and or mentored by those who are in license 4, but they haven't necessarily demonstrated any by being a licensed 4, they haven't demonstrated any competency or expertise in those areas. And so that just kind of concerns me across the board. And this is something that we also had in ours as licensed 3, but just a kind of a thought to put out there as well.
And I think, I think you're making a good point, Aaron, about the language there. I think it's written in there as license 4 advanced teacher. So the top license is license 4 for a teacher, but then it can also be an advanced teacher once you hold the license 4. So I think we could just remove the license 4 from it and leave it at advanced teacher. That might be cleaner for sure.
Yeah, I think so, because the only way, I mean, right now, the way the model is that license 4 is just demonstrating growth with students, right? That not necessarily there's some mentoring and or kind of teaching capabilities within that. Adult learner capabilities within that.
Thank you, Aaron. Any other comments or responses to what Aaron just said?
Yeah, Scott Rhodes, Henderson County Public Schools. It's really not a statement, it's more just a question. Like I completely understand the reason behind that comment, but my question would be, if you take away the ability of a licensed 4 teacher to be able to serve in that role, will there be enough teachers who meet the requirements of the advanced teacher roles to be able to meet those needs at every school? That's
completely agree.
And follow up to that, how many, with the advanced teacher role, how many teachers could they be potentially supervising, co-teaching with in a single year? Because they're still expected to have their own classroom as well, correct?
Not necessarily, not the way I'm reading this. If they were in that classroom excellence track, I thought the idea was that they would maybe have some number, not very many, I would hope, maybe 3 or 4 that they were co-teaching with, and right, that they wouldn't, in addition, have their own students. That's the way that I've interpreted what I've seen.
So this is Tom. Can I ask what group? I'm sorry, I was off for a minute. What group are we talking about?
License 1. Well, we're talking about license 1, but we're building out advanced teacher roles that would provide support to the license 1 teachers.
And are we asking whether a classroom excellence teacher has classes of his or her own?
Christina, was that the question?
I think so. I mean, well, and I guess there's some underlying assumptions under there. We're talking about who would be the co-teacher of record with this license 1 teacher. And I guess my underlying assumption would be that would be a license 4 classroom excellence teacher.
That is correct.
And that classroom excellence teacher would not have their own students.
I don't know if that's true. That's a question of implementation. So there would be flexibility in the LEA to configure this how it works for them. So you could imagine a situation where a classroom excellence teacher has a classroom of 50 students working with a licensed 1 teacher, or maybe 2 licensed 1 teachers. And so they're all in a co-teaching situation. We're trying not to tell districts how they would configure this, or you could have a classroom excellence teacher who has a regular schedule, but that classroom is open to licensed 1 teachers to come in and co-teach, and you could create a laboratory setting kind of for those teachers of classroom excellence. So we're trying to avoid really putting specific parameters around how an LEA would operationalize this. The idea is that a classroom excellence teacher should be expanding their impact on more students than they could do in the traditional classroom model. That is 25 to 30 students.
I think what we want to avoid, though, is having a situation where a licensed 1 teacher ends up in the classroom with a group of students on their own.
That's correct.
Right? So in that sense, we want to be very clear. I hear what you're saying about wanting to give districts the flexibility to configure this, but what you just said was the classroom excellence teacher might have students, their own classroom of students, but then they have a licensed 1 teacher in there with them. That's different. So, but then what's clear there is that the licensed 1 teacher does not have their own students. So I think, it's a matter of semantics, but the semantics are very important. We do not want to have, this committee, I think, has been very clear that we do not believe the licensed 1 teacher should at any time be the teacher of record and have students that they're responsible for without somebody else there. So I think we need to be very careful about the language and when we give flexibility, how we give that flexibility.
And Tom, I think when we get to license 2 in a second, we're going to have a parallel recommendation. That then, Tom, is it correct? That would then introduce a potential budget question where we might have to project out if we expect this many license 1 and license 2 teachers who need this kind of support from advanced teachers. That has a budget implication.
That is correct.
Yes.
I would see that, yes.
So I think maybe we can move to license 2 and 3, and there may be parallel issues. It is looking like we're going to have 2 or 3 points that we're going to need to move over to budget, given the way the structure of this starts to come together.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Tom, can I go back? Did I hear that correctly, that there's an assumption that a licensed 1 teacher would not have students of their own?
From what I understand in the recommendation, they would have to be the co-teacher of record with someone that's a license 4 or a license 4 plus, or license 4 classroom excellence teacher. So in that, what I'm envisioning then, so we're talking about a true co-teaching model for the license 1, and think of it, Scott, as your first-year residency license holders
who are currently teacher of record.
Correct.
Yes.
That's where I'm going with that.
That's right.
So, Tom, here's my concern with that, right? Like, that really sounds great in theory.
Good.
When we start thinking about advanced teacher roles and we start thinking about, and I go back and I look at, are we going to have enough of those teachers across the state that are going to meet those requirements to be able to serve in that capacity to meet that requirement? Because what that feels like from an LEA standpoint is reduced flexibility. And what we need here is more flexibility. Because currently, right now, we have a residency licensed teacher who is the teacher of record. So that would be a complete change from currently what we're doing, which is okay if that's the determination of the committee. But that would be a huge change. And being able to support that at the district level, I believe would be very challenging.
So I agree, Scott. It would be very challenging for my system as well.
I think part of the answer to that is we don't know yet. So we got to figure out some of these other moving parts, and at least the first 2 license areas have recommended an increased salary. The more attractive the salary component becomes, the more likely that we're going to, hopefully, more likely that we would have more people coming into the pathways. And the reality of budget and structure will settle in. The license 1, license apprentice, and license 1 so far are proposing what they believe to be the optimal plan, and then reality becomes what can we do based on budget and infrastructure.
Yeah. So, Ray and Scott, I can't tell you how much I'm applauding your conversation here, because this is where the practicality has to meld with the theoretical. And I think we really need this voice in this conversation, because if this can't work or we can't envision how it could possibly work, we need to know that. And and one of the things this is trying to address is the challenge of these first year residency teachers. Like, we know they're leaving at just incredible rates relative to traditionally prepared teachers. So part of the theory of action here is, how can we create an environment that lets them get their feet under them and feel like they're in a scaffolded learning environment that will incentivize them to persist in the profession. We don't know. I mean, I'll give you, we don't know for sure that they're leaving because they're just completely overwhelmed and they were thrown into the deep end and they drowned. But that's our overarching kind of hypothesis.
Tom, and I'm looking at Aaron's comment in the chat, and we need to get to the other two licenses. But once we have come to some reasonably refined articulation of the model, and we're not there yet, we're still working through it, and to taking into considerations the kinds of questions that Scott Ray just asked, for example, in order to do the things that the model will propose doing, it has implications for the number of professionals of different types at each one of the licensure areas. That is going to drive the ability to do fiscal analysis. Okay, if we're going to have this many license one who cannot be autonomous and they're going to need these supports, this many license one has a cost. The nature of the supports has a cost. To Aaron's question in the chat about the budget, the infrastructure has a cost. We don't know what those costs are yet because we have not clarified all those parts. When we get those parts clarified and we start to talk about real numbers, then the question becomes, are those numbers achievable? And if they're not, where do the compromises to the model get made? Because the resource question gets answered. But I think if we start compromising what we believe is the best model, we're never going to get to the best model. I think our job is to propose the best model. And I think, well, let's go ahead and do license 2 and 3, and then we can come back. We've got about 25 minutes left. The questions are incredibly important, but we got a lot of moving parts to be articulated.
This is Cheryl. I worked with Andrew and Van on license 2, and I'm sharing our notes. And I do realize this first bullet is going to raise the same concerns we were just discussing, but we talked about whether a person at license 2 is ready to assume the full responsibilities of teacher of record, and we propose that they should be a semi-autonomous teacher of record, working along with and supported by an assigned advanced teacher. And we specifically use that term, assigned teacher. One of the changes we made is that we had the expectation that they would have already met the requirement of one of the content praxis tests. And then we weren't certain about pedagogy exam, whether that was implying ed TPA or it could be some other type of pedagogy exam. So we kept those paired together. Under preparation sponsor, we made a change here suggesting that it should be a collaboration or a partnership of a EPP and PSU. And we want to be very specific that this does not mean necessarily traditional enrollment in an EPP as we know it now. It can be an alternative way of accessing that knowledge base. But we do believe we are better if we're working together, and that the EPPs can't do it without the knowledge and the input of the PSUs, but also the EPPs can add to that for the PSUs. Under the requirements that they complete while in this license, we suggested the addition. We understand micro-credentials, but we also want to add another area of professional development or professional learning community structures that are evidence-based and situated in practice. These could be led by advanced teachers. This could be led by people from our EPPs, but this is different from the micro-credentialing in that it doesn't happen in isolation. It's not just a module you work through, but this is something that's evidence-based and situated in practice. when we were discussing the practical educator evidence review or peer, we added here, the original language says that they will be observed by a licensed 4+ teacher, but we added, given the change we had made at the top, that this person has an assigned advanced teacher person, that advanced teacher assigned specifically to them would provide observation in addition to another licensed 4 teacher. And we do realize this is making demands of teachers at those upper levels. We also added the note about that this should be considered a performance assessment, it should be truly performance assessment in structure. Is there anything I've left out or anything that my colleagues would like to add?
Cheryl, a side note, given the ripple effect of the salary changes, that would implicate, the 40,000 here would change depending on what happens back in the one at Brenda's license 1.
Good point. I'm going to stop sharing.
We did add to what Cheryl said. We tried to pick up on previous conversations where we consistently talked about the importance of performance assessments and make sure that was built in to into the structure.
And I would just add that we had a number of slides, but we did not get further than that first slide with the requirements.
Any questions? License 3.
I'm going to speak for license 3, but I recently had my computer wiped and done over, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to share. I'm going to try it now. Without leaving the meeting, I can't share my screen. So, Heather, do you have the Google Doc open? Can you share it?
I'm working on it. I'm also on a new computer, so it has no permission to do anything.
Yeah, I gave it permission, but it won't apply the permissions until I leave them. I have to exit WebEx. I'll just talk about, we made a lot of changes.
Yeah.
So it would be good if we could see it, but maybe Kim or somebody can share the Google Doc. We put it in our group for Google Doc.
Hold on just a second.
Thank you, Kim. So I'll just start talking while she's working on that. So we actually did everything in the Google Doc. We didn't use the slides. We copied and pasted and did changes in the Google Doc. So we're proposing, we didn't actually talk about salary at all. Of course, that would all change based on some of the things that the earlier licenses recommended. As far as the requirements, going back to our discussion at the last meeting, thank you, Kim. We believe that at License 3, we should require successful completion of an approved EPP program. Now, I know that might sound like we're giving up on some of the changes, but what we're suggesting here is that an approved EPP is not necessarily a traditional program or traditional IHE, but that approval process would serve as a way to make sure that everybody is meeting the same standard. And so we defined an approved EPP is one that has a program that has ongoing peer review and state approval or national accreditation through some place like CAPE or AQUIP, and a plan for supporting candidate completion and meeting in-task standards. So getting back to that idea of everybody's got to meet the in-task standards. And then we define successful completion. And so successful completion means demonstrating proficiency in the in-task standards through one of the following. And we've tried to streamline and simplify that a little bit. So one of the following is EdGPA or PPAP, because they have crosswalks in place that demonstrate that they measure the in-task standards. or a portfolio of micro-credentials that demonstrates that the candidate meets the in-task standards, or a quality, and that is valid and reliable, with demonstrated validity and reliability evidence, observation tool that's aligned with in-task. And some of those already exist, for example, the Danielson framework or the class instrument. But it would need to have trained observers from EPPs and PSUs, and so that it's triangulated and demonstrates that the candidate meets the in-task standards. So they would have some flexibility with some different ways to demonstrate that proficiency on the standard. So we made some pretty big changes there. In terms of support, we talked about making sure that there's collaboration between the PSUs and the EPPs, and then also amongst EPPs, that there is support amongst EPPs, some communities of practice for EPPs to make sure that all the EPPs have support and are working together to make sure that there's commonalities. Then we talked a lot about this idea of the initial teacher support program, and the fact that we think that this group, and I mentioned this last time, needs to make recommendations to revise the FBE approval process so that there is flexibility. I think this gets to some of what was raised by the LEAs earlier. We don't have any even distribution of the teachers who are going to be eligible for the higher licenses in our LEAs and our PSUs. So we want to make sure that there are alternatives, and we have some existing programs that have demonstrated success, such as the North Carolina Teacher Support Program. There might be others out there, but we need to make sure that the policy that's written includes access for those programs to provide quality beginning teacher support. We clarified a little bit what that advancement and development plan is, that it's like a PDP that outlines how to move from the current license to the next license and includes a mentor. Kim, can you scroll a little bit? Thank you. And then this, again, is relates to some of the things that were brought up by other groups. We need to factor in how that we think that the ITSP should address this, how the support is provided. So how districts would address this if they don't have a level 4 or higher educator in that content area. And then, which leads to questions about those advanced license areas. How do we address folks who have already left the classroom? For example, I have 8 new teacher support coaches currently who are employed by UNCG. They're no longer in a PSU. They're no longer in a classroom. How would they be licensed? And Tom suggested that the appropriate license for them would be in the adult leadership role. But we need to make sure that in that definition of how you access that adult leadership role, that there is room for folks who have already left PSUs in order to demonstrate that they meet those criteria. We also talked at the end, and we got cut off, about other folks who maintain licenses who are no longer in the classroom. For example, both Dr. Horn and myself maintain licenses. Where would we fall into this? And I think that's something that needs to be addressed maybe by the advancement committee. I'm not sure. And then another change that we suggested is this idea, and this I think came up in the feedback. License 3 is a license term. We suggest a license term of 5 years. Within that 5-year term, if you don't meet the growth expectation for at least 3 years, Kim, I think we need to scroll again. We suggested that the license 3 could be renewed for one additional term of 5 years. After the one additional term of 5 years, if the teacher has not demonstrated 3 years of growth, then that license would be revoked. So essentially, we're proposing that we give them 10 years at license 3 to make 3 years of growth. At that time, the license is revoked. And we already talked about that question about how do those who are not in classrooms renew and or fall into this model. So questions for us?
Christina, in the portfolio of micro-credentials bullet, that you had up in the top, is there an expectation that those micro-credentials would have some kind of clinical, there's a performance component?
I think they would have to in order to demonstrate the in-task standards, right? So, I mean, for us, like the in-task standards are that's the anchor, right? So that would hold all this together is that you have to meet all the in-task standards to get a license free.
Would it behoove us to be that explicit in the bullet portfolio of performance-based?
Yes, I think that, yeah, I can make that change.
We also talked that this may help our out-of-state folks if they're coming from a nationally accredited institution. They can now enter as well.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, we talked about the out-of-state because that was another area that people raised as a concern. How would somebody coming from out-of-state fit into this?
Any questions or comments for this breakout group?
So these requirements here on the Google spreadsheet that you all have come up with, then you're saying are going to replace everything that's currently on the slide as requirements. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, if you look, if Kim were to scroll down, you'd see where we struck through everything else that was there. We just moved it down, all the way down, Kim. I think there's strike through, yeah. We don't believe nieces should be part of this. And I saw that in the feedback too. There was a lot of the feedback that I read that was had a lot of concerns about nieces being used for this, and there was a lot of concern about the peer review process, and so we tried to streamline it, simplify it, and still have multiple pathways, but keeping that bar of in-task standards and validity and reliability. If we're going to be making high stakes decisions about people's careers, based on, we need to make sure we're using instruments that have solid data quality behind them.
So is there some evidence that NESIS doesn't have validity and reliability?
I think there's lots of anecdotal evidence that's not reliable, that the scores on it are highly subjective and there's not a lot of consistency. The validity, I think you could make an argument that it has some validity. There's some validity evidence there as far as being, crosswalked to the North Carolina standards and the in-task standards. But as far as the training and the reliability of the data, I think there's lots of concerns about, and I don't think that I have not seen any reliability evidence published on that.
So my concerns with the way it's implemented are, I'm with you on that. As far as an instrument, whether...
Instruments are not reliable. Data is reliable.
I understand that, Dr. O'Connor. What I'm saying is that tool passed those requirements for validity and reliability. What is our theory of action that any other instrument we choose that has similar issues that has similar levels of validity and reliability is not going to be implemented in a way that's problematic, that's equally problematic to what we're seeing with NESIS? And my question is the evaluation process itself fundamentally problematic, or is it the instrument we've decided to use? And given that virtually every other state in the union has the same issues that we have with evaluation, it leads me to believe that it's not instrument specific, it's some other quality of the process.
Well, there are other instruments that have quality measures built in. For example, class requires rigorous training and recertification annually of people to use it. So there are things in place to ensure that the data is reliable because they have processes in place to support that reliability, right? So you're right. Like, you can implement an instrument in a way that results in unreliable data. I think you and I are on the same page in believing that the way that NESAS is currently implemented is problematic. We agree on that. Yeah. And I think there are things that we could do to make NESAS implementation more reliable. There are certainly things that we could put in place to do that. I think personally, I have some critiques of the instrument itself, not necessarily validity, not necessarily, I think there's alignment. I think there's a lot of double and triple barreled items, and I have a lot of concerns about the instrument quality there that are, independent of the process. But I think that, what I would stand behind is that whatever we use, that we need to have a strong implementation process in place that is, again, not just about choosing. I think you and I agree, at least to some extent, right? That it's not just about the instrument you choose; it's about how you implement it. And I've heard you say on several times, well, that's an implementation question. But I think this thing can all fall apart on implementation. So I think it's really important that we are specific about how some things need to be implemented.
Sure. And I think, so what I'm trying to raise here is in the peer review process, the way we try to address this problem of bias in the instrument is through incorporating more observers into the process. And that's what I want to make sure we're not losing sight of, is any instrument, any subjective evaluation instrument is going to be vulnerable to what we're experiencing in the state of North Carolina right now and across the country in terms of teacher evaluation. It's incorporating more observers into the process that allows us to wash out that bias. I don't think this is instrument specific as much as ensuring that we have lots of voices in that conversation.
I don't fundamentally disagree with you, but I would argue that it's not just about having lots of voices. It's about the training and the processes that you have in place to make sure that you're taking steps to ensure that everybody has the same understanding of what it means to be at X level, right? So just having more people in it doesn't eliminate the problem. It's how you go about training those folks and the processes that you have in place.
Because we're right at the end of time, I'm starting to think, number one, there's the recommendations that we make in each one of the pathway components. There's likely to be also a set of sort of transcendent recommendations that cut across all the apprentice to license 3 in the conversation that Christina and Tom were just having, that the process has, I tried to capture this in a sentence, the process has to be built on an in-task framed, performance-based infrastructure for the assessment of practice. NESAS could be part of or inform that, but we have to make sure we build what we need to support these pathways, not assume that an existing instrument is the one. Would that capture what you just discussed? We don't need to literally say it that way, but
yes, I think it would. I think part of my concern, though, I would just add, is that I think that people, because NESAS is what we are currently using, I think it, to some extent, including it in there undermines the model because people have their existing paradigms and beliefs about it being biased and not implemented in a certain way. So I think there would be some benefit in moving to something else because it would eliminate that as sort of a starting point.
And that's a question that has to be on the table moving forward. I mean, that's really, Christine, what I'm saying is that we need to put that analytical point on the table to move this forward. We don't know the answer to the question yet. I think we're at 11:28.
Yeah, that's a lot of work that we got done today. It's great stuff.
So I just wanted to check in on what you wanted to provide recommendation as far as other subcommittees. So I make sure that they get that in a timely manner.
The salary changes.
Okay, so for apprentice and license 1, is that correct?
Well, I'm going to assume now we got to build in an escalator.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Kim, I think we need to let's calculate the percentage increase for the 35,000 for apprentice and apply that to the rest and make that recommendation to budget and compensation. Does that satisfy everyone? Is that the correct thing for us to do, Dr. Dempsey and Dr. Weddington?
I think it gets us started. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It puts a number on the document for people to digest.
Okay.
The second one is this more complicated infrastructure cost that if we're address the kind of question that Scott raised and we build out an infrastructure that makes license 1 work the way we're proposing it, that's going to have systemic cost that need to be addressed. But I don't know if we're got enough detail yet to run those numbers.
And also about the professional advancement accounts? Thinking that it wasn't enough money, the $2,500?
Yes.
Okay.
That actually, I didn't mention it, but that came up in our group as well.
Okay. Did you have a certain number that you recommended, Christina?
We didn't get that far.
Okay.
And then, Hank, we'll sort of have a co-chair meeting in real time here. I think it would be helpful to make sure we hold on to this draft language that we use today, and we need some consistency in formatting, which is what the template provides. And it might be helpful to come back to these same subgroups if we can keep a list of who was away, breakout groups, to continue the writing in the next meeting.
Yeah.
As best as we can hold them together. Does that make sense to everybody?
Sounds like a plan.
And I think we're ready to call it almost Friday afternoon.
Yeah. Can we get a motion for adjournment?
This is Heather, so moved.
Second.
Randy, I'll second.
Thanks, Randy. And all those in favor can hit your red X and leave the meeting.
Bye, y'all.
See ya.
Have a good weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.